So, well, welcome to the last presentation of this session. My name is Zeynep. I'm a PhD student in TU Eindhoven, and in the next 20 minutes I will talk about our work titled Guiding Knowledge Workers Under Dynamic Contexts. I will first start with the motivation behind this work. Indeed, the work here is driven by a practical challenge we have in a project called IP Spine. In this project, we have some scientists developing a novel type of medicinal product that is based on stem cells and some smart biomaterials. And the aim in this project is to develop a safe and effective product for human use, so a product that doesn't kill people and effectively treating a disease. And since this is a product for human use, there are some regulations that the scientists should be considering throughout the development process in order to demonstrate that the product is safe and effective. On the regulatory side, there are different regulatory classifications that the scientists, regulatory frameworks that the scientists can follow, and these frameworks depend on how they classify their product on the regulatory side. For instance, there is this option of classifying the product as a medical device, then it has its own regulations and regulatory requirements. And there is another option as classifying the product as an advanced therapy, then it has its own regulations. And these regulations require different experiments and tests to be done throughout the development process that can demonstrate the safe and effective characteristics of the medicinal product. Well, the challenge here is that the regulatory classification of the material, meaning whether it's going to be a medical device or an advanced therapy or something else, is something uncertain before the development process starts. And it is rather something decided by the scientists throughout the development by looking at the results of the experiments, results of the tests, and what is expected by the regulatory requirements of different classification options. So in such a case, they are a bit challenging to organize this process, the development process, in an efficient manner, because in the end they want to do only the experiments that are only required by the regulations of the final requirements, because doing experiments, doing those tests are costly, time-consuming and risky. So, well, they need some help in organizing and prioritizing the tests so that they can indeed demonstrate the safety and efficacy of their product in an efficient manner. And, well, we are in this project to first support them with a process management approach and the tool, and specifically in this work to help them in answering that question. So, well, looking at this practical challenge, indeed, development of such a product is a knowledge-intensive process. And, well, what is a knowledge-intensive process? Knowledge-intensive processes are business processes that are centered around expert knowledge, and their conduct and execution are heavily dependent on some experts, as we call it, knowledge workers, performing some interconnected, knowledge-intensive decision-making tasks. To make things a little bit more concrete, some example knowledge-intensive processes are, for instance, a disease diagnosis process, where we have a doctor and a patient with a symptom, and it's the doctor, trying to diagnose the disease, and as an expert, he is the one organizing the actions that he needs to take to do so. And again, as a practical challenge, we have medicinal product development is an example. Here we have scientists as experts, as knowledge workers, aiming to develop a safe and effective product and, well, managing the process, organizing the process around their knowledge. And lastly, project management, where each project has its own risks, requirements, challenges, and as the expert in this case, the project manager decides upon the actions to be taken throughout the project to deliver the project within certain budget limits, time limits, etc. So, well, as also obvious in the examples, knowledge-intensive processes have two important characteristics. They are goal-oriented and flexible. So in each case, we have a goal that should be achieved by the process, and the course of actions evolve through achieving those goals. And well, as the expert in the executing the process, the knowledge worker has the flexibility to decide upon how that goal can be reached. So in that sense, knowledge-intensive processes are different than the traditional business processes that we know that are rather inflexible, routine, and predictable. And, well, relatedly, as they are different, they require different approaches for their management and modeling. Case management is a rather recent approach that deals well with the goal-oriented and flexible nature of knowledge-intensive processes. And CMMN, Case Management Model and Notation, is a modeling notation by Object Management Group that is sort of the industry standard for case management approach. On the slide, you see an case plan, case model from the medicinal product development example we have. Here you see some square shapes with rounded edges. These represent tasks, as in many other modeling notations as atomic units of work. Here we have something called milestones. These are, again, represented in rectangle-like shapes, again, rounded edges. Milestones represent some achievable targets within a case model, and in a knowledge-intensive process setting, they can be used to model goals. And attached to these tasks and milestones, you see some diamond-like shapes. These are called centuries, and centuries involve data and event conditions that specify when a task within a case model is actually enabled, so is ready for the execution of the knowledge worker, and when the condition that should be satisfied for a milestone, for a goal within the case model to be achieved. So of course, as you also see here, CMMN has many more constructs like event listeners, stages, etc. But well, these are the ones that are important to that are important for understanding our work, and you can find all the details if you're interested in the standard. So when talking about goals, of course, context is an important concept to consider, because context of a business process affects how you execute a business process and how you reach your goals. So, well, thinking about the goal orientation of knowledge-intensive processes, it's also important for our case. But what is context exactly? There is a lot of work on context in business process management, and still a lack of consensus about what exactly context is and how it can be defined. But on a very general terms, it can be defined as any information that affect how you execute the business process and how you reach your goals. A very classical example is weather. So if you have an insurance claim handling process, weather has an effect on how you execute this process, because under bad weather conditions, you might have a lot of claims, so you might want to execute your process in a different manner, in a faster manner, to handle these claims better in such conditions compared to the case where you have moderate or nice weather conditions, for instance. So it has an effect how you reach your goals in a process. And as also the case for the weather example, traditionally, context is considered as something that lies beyond the boundaries of a business process and the process executor. So it's not it's uncontrolled. It's not affected by the execution of the process or the actor executing the process. And if there is a change in the context, this change is rather an unexpected change. And if you want to, for instance, make your processes context aware, there the aim is to adapt your processes as much as possible to these unexpected changes in the environment. However, So looking at a knowledge-intensive process setting, we see that this definition can be slightly different. Instead of being uncontrolled, context being uncontrolled, indeed it can be affected or shaped by the interpretations of the knowledge worker executing the process through their interpretations of the process throughout the process. And well, again, instead of being the changes in the context being unexpected, the changes can also be, well, a natural part of the business logic of the process. What do we mean? So again, using the same examples, I will try to explain it a little bit more. In the medicinal product development case, we said that the goal is to develop a safe product, and there the context is defined by the regulatory classification of the product, because different regulatory classifications has different regulatory requirements, and each of these regulations require different experiments, different tests throughout the product development to be done to demonstrate safety. So it has an effect on how you do the product development process. And well, the classification of the product is uncertain at the beginning, and it's shaped based on the interpretations of the knowledge worker, in this case the scientist, by looking at the experiment results, test results, etc. So it's not uncontrollable, but rather affected and shaped by as a result of the process execution, by the interpretations of the knowledge worker. And similarly, since this context is uncertain at the beginning and shaped throughout the process execution, the change in context is something normal, something expected, rather than being totally unexpected. Another example, again from disease diagnosis. So we have here, the goal is we have a patient, the goal is to confirm a final and true diagnosis for this patient, and the context is the suspected disease, because each suspected disease requires different tests to be confirmed. Some require blood tests, some require X-rays, etc. However, at the beginning, this context is uncertain, so final diagnosis is uncertain, and it's again shaped based on the interpretations of the doctor, which is the knowledge worker in this case. And well, by simply looking at the results, he or she might want to also investigate other suspected diseases, which is totally a natural part of the process. So the dynamism of the context is really expected rather than being unexpected. Having said that, it's also possible to reflect this on a CMMN model to reflect, to imply how different contexts lead to different ways of achieving the goals in a knowledge-intensive process setting. And we do it by using combination of milestones and centuries. You see the same example again here from medicinal product development, and on the bottom you see some milestones, and on top of them you see multiple centuries attached to that. And in this case, for instance, these centuries define different conditions, different information collection needs that should be satisfied under different contexts to say that this milestone is achieved, this milestone is reached. So going back to the problem we said that knowledge-intensive processes are different. So they are executed by knowledge workers, and they do not require a very strict dictating process model. So they require flexible execution. Therefore, in a CMMN model of such a knowledge-intensive process, there are usually multiple tasks enabled at the same time, and as the expert, the knowledge worker decides upon what tasks to do next and how to organize them. In the cases where the context is uncertain and inherently dynamic, as we have in the disease diagnosis and medicinal product development case, the knowledge workers are having trouble in deciding upon, in organizing these tasks in an efficient manner. because, well, we know that, again, we want to reach those milestones with the least number of tasks that is only required by the sentry conditions on these milestones, because doing extra is, well, means money, time, and risk. So that was the problem we tried to address in this work. And we also had our own challenges in doing so. And first one was about data. So knowledge-intensive processes are quite unique, and they are hardly repeatable. In the cases like medicinal product development, there hardly exists any historical data, historical executions of similar cases that we can use to provide such a guidance. So we had to do something that does not really require historical data. And also, as I have been explaining for a couple of minutes, the definition of context as we have here was something quite different and novel compared to the definitions in the existing work. So in our paper, we provide an approach that addresses this problem. Our approach takes the CMMN model with contextual milestones as input. This is the model where I have shown you, which I have shown you a couple of slides ago, milestones with multiple sentries. And using the relations on this CMMN model, so the relations between tasks and data and sentry conditions and sentries and different milestones, we provide a list of prioritized tasks to the knowledge worker that he or she can use to, well, organize the available tasks in the process. This prioritization is based on the contribution of tasks to the achievement of milestones under multiple contexts at first step, because at the first step there is no information about context, so we prioritize the tasks that indeed contribute to the multiple possible contexts. Then, well, the knowledge worker chooses a task, performs one, so collects some information. There is, of course, a progress in the process. Based on this progress, we update our prioritization list and then provide two options to the knowledge worker. Either with the new list, with the updated list, he or she can choose to prioritize the task that contribute to the multiple context still. But since there will be some information now about context, about data, some context can be more probable, so another option is to prioritize tasks of a single context. So then, well, again, the knowledge worker chooses a task, performs one, and this cycle goes on until the end of the process. To test our approach, we performed a simulation study. The simulation study is again based on the medicinal product development case we have in the project. We have simulated two models. In the first model, we have the case where we have some available tasks and the scientist chooses among those available tasks randomly, which is the case where they have no support. And in the second model, the scientist follows the recommendations of our prioritization approach when choosing the available tasks. And, well, for this simulation, indeed, we got nice results showing that, indeed, following our prioritization recommendations resulted in achieving the milestones, achieving the goals with less number of tasks compared to the case where they make this choice randomly. To conclude, here our focus was knowledge-intensive processes that are centered around expert knowledge, that are flexible and goal-oriented, and especially the ones where context is inherently dynamic and shaped by the interpretations of knowledge workers. The problem we addressed was about how they can indeed efficiently organize and prioritize this flexible process such that they can reach those goals efficiently. And our solution in the paper is an approach that is based on, that's the task prioritization approach that based on the contribution of tasks to multiple contexts. Well, Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you. It was a good presentation, and I can see already some correlations between my work and this one. Is your approach suitable for multiple patients or multiple, rather than tasks, multiple patients, multiple experts, or is it single expert and their tasks?
Maybe if you can elaborate more, what would be the problem then when we have multiple
For
experts?
example, if there's a multiple cases,
Okay.
you may have to select between different contexts and priorities. So is this bringing tasks from different, I'm talking about, let's take a hospital context. Are the tasks you are talking about, are they coming from one patient only?
One patient, yes.
Or 2 patients, or 10 patients, or 100 patients at the same time? That's my first question. And is it one expert doing these tasks, and these tasks are assigned to him or her, or is it multiple experts that are available, and you are trying to optimize your, target, the targets you are trying to reach?
To answer your first question, it's now one patient, of course, because, well, we have a patient with a symptom, and the aim is to diagnose this disease that this patient has. So for now, it is one patient, and it's difficult to imagine what changes where we have multiple patients and what would be the challenge. But no, so for now, we haven't considered such a case. But about the doctors doing different tasks in the process, well, it can be done, of course, because it wouldn't change anything. We're here focusing on available tasks and their prioritization. Who they are assigned to would not really change a lot in our approach.
Thank you very much. I have a more like an ontological question on what you mean when you mention context isn't the same as goals. Is there any difference on mapping goals, dynamic goals, instead of mapping context? What's the really the
similarity? Can you maybe repeat it again? I couldn't hear you clearly.
What's the difference between context and goals? That's can I just rephrase this into dynamic goals? And that was one question. The second question is, one persistent aspect on knowledge work is the possibility of doing rework. A knowledge worker would come and revisit the test and then readdress because they found that there was something that was missing. How would that rework affect this dynamic prioritization?
Okay. So to answer your first question, indeed, here we can, well, map this or rephrase it as dynamic goals because, okay, the goal is to develop, for instance, for the medicinal product case, a safe product, but if you maybe decompose it into some minor goals, then, well, depending on context, those goals are dynamically changing. So, indeed, well, but the context is then the factor affecting the reason behind that makes the goals dynamic, in a sense. So, in a sense, I think that comes to the same point. And about the second part, so it's true, but for instance, if a task is repetitive, so if the CMMN model allows repetition, then, well, once we perform it in the model, then it will be still enabled like, so it will be still in the list of enabled tasks which we can prioritize. So that can be, well, to be honest, we haven't considered that here because we always assume that it's not repeated again. But yeah, that should be indeed included in the approach, maybe with some minor changes.
Thank you. I have a question. I was looking for a structural definition of the context. I mean, it could be a conceptual model, it could be an ontology, it is necessarily related to the domain knowledge, but do you have at least a draft of this kind of definition?
Yeah. So it's a good question. It's not in this work, but indeed this work is also a part of my PhD, and this is something that we build upon what you are describing about, well, how we define goals, how we define context, how we model context. Here, that is not the focus, because simply in the CMMM model, we have milestone with multiple centuries, and these centuries represent different ways of achieving that milestone, in this case, this context. But of course, as part of my PhD, that is something I am considering, which is like, this is something that builds upon that, and well, again, not related to this one, but I'm using some conceptual modeling approaches and so on to give a more concrete definition of what context is and how it can be defined.
Okay, thank you. And also in order to guide decisions.
Yeah, true.
Are there other questions?
Thank you. If I understood, you say that you recommend tasks by looking at possibly a multiple milestones, not just at one, right?
Multiple contexts.
And also, in order to achieve multiple milestones, yes, not just one.
Yes.
So may it happen that one task has a positive effect in achieving one milestone, but a negative effect in achieving another milestone? So there may arise this sort of conflict, and in this case, how do you deal with it in choosing the task, in recommending the tasks?
Yes. So it's a good question. For the examples that I am indeed considering now, that's not the case, because I'm simply focusing on some information collection perspective of tasks that is required to achieve those milestones. So in any case, a milestone is a goal that you want to achieve, and while collecting this information, performing that task, indeed contributes to the achievement, not in the other way around. Well, so the approach does not really cover what you are describing, and for the cases that I'm focusing on, I can maybe say that that is not really that important, but to have this generalized view, indeed, that is something that I should think about.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can applaud all our presenters.